I didn't know what to do, but I knew he was a good talker. And in the real world, he was the one that always went out.
Before the engines cooled and before the cameras stopped rolling, something unexpected happened. A project built on speed, risk, and opportunity suddenly ran into silence. Farmtruck and AZN set out to give local racers their moment on a national stage, believing this would be the next big chapter in Street Outlaws history. But when the dust settled, questions began to rise, momentum stalled, and the future became unclear. What went wrong after everything seemed to go right? And how did this quiet moment change the path for two of the most recognizable names in street racing? Stay with us, because this story isn't about a race that was lost. It's about a moment when the spotlight didn't turn on. The rise of Farmtruck and AZN.
Once she turned 18, I believe they could sell the stuff that they didn't want.
When people hear the names Farmtruck and AZN, they are not just thinking about two personalities who appeared on a reality television series. They are hearing the story of two racers who earned their reputation through years of dedication in the Street Outlaws world and on the notorious 405 list of Oklahoma City street racers. According to widely shared sources, the 405 list represents the fastest street-raced cars in the OKC area, a ranking that demands respect and consistency rather than luck or hype. For a long time, fans wondered how these two managed to break into such an elite group. That question was finally addressed when Farmtruck sat down for a revealing interview with Drag Illustrated. In that conversation, he explained that filming an entire season of their spin-off, Street Outlaws, Locals Only, was a massive gamble. "We shot a full season and traveled all over the country," he said. "Then everything went quiet. We were unpacking our bags and thinking maybe that was it." The silence that followed filming was filled with uncertainty, the kind that almost every racer faces when stepping into television for the first time. The interviewer highlighted that this uncertainty was a natural part of crossing from underground racing into a national spotlight. Farmtruck reinforced this point by saying, "First and foremost, we're racers." That statement was central to their identity. They never wanted to be known only as reality television personalities. What mattered most was maintaining credibility as racers who had earned their place on streets and drag strips long before cameras followed them. Dragzine later described the duo as racers who showcased their unique style, sensibility, and sense of adventure, while transitioning from raw street builds into a televised format. Even so, they continued pushing forward with projects like Locals Only, a show many fans see as a defining milestone in their career. The concept was simple but powerful. Travel the country, spotlight local racers, and put them head-to-head in no-prep challenges against competitors shaped by 405 experience. Their momentum did not stop there. Farmtruck and AZN returned to the 405 scene with unconventional small-tire builds, proving they were not locked into a single approach. These choices showed the racing community that they were willing to experiment, adapt, and test new ideas. Dedicated fans often point to this mindset as what truly separates them from the rest. Despite growing fame, they refused to become TV racers. They stayed grounded, continuing to define themselves as racers first and celebrities second. That consistency earned them trust within the racing community and authenticity with fans. When Farmtruck publicly reaffirmed that racing came before everything else, it only confirmed what supporters already believed. In short, Farmtruck and AZN moved from street legends to TV veterans by staying rooted in their street strip racing heritage, embracing the risk of a national platform, and never losing sight of their core identity as racers. Their journey is filled with bold builds, countrywide travel, and spotlight moments that set them apart in the high-stakes and high-adrenaline world of the 405. The unexpected twist that tested everything. For a group so deeply committed to being racers first, it was only natural that when Street Outlaws Locals Only launched, Farmtruck and AZN believed they were widening their path. They were not chasing growth just for themselves, but also creating opportunity for racers across the country who rarely received a spotlight. The bigger question, however, lingered quietly in the background. Did the show truly deliver the thrilling impact on local racers that they envisioned? In many ways, it did. This was not simply another season of familiar 405 list battles. Instead, it offered something different and meaningful. A platform, a real chance, and national television exposure for local talent. Yet after filming Wrapped, they ran into a twist that no one anticipated. That twist was silence. From the outset, Locals Only was designed to feel distinct. In an interview with Drag Illustrated, Farmtruck explained, "We shot an entire season and traveled the country." Alongside AZN, he crisscrossed regions with cameras, crews, and a clear mission. 8 drivers from each home track area were invited to race head-to-head, and then one local competitor would face off against a 405 list veteran for a bonus purse. The idea struck a powerful chord. Racers felt they were being handed an opportunity that could genuinely change their lives. As Farmtruck recalled, they told participants, "This is your shot," and the response was immediate and enthusiastic. AZN also reflected on how invested the local racers were, even though the process pushed many outside their comfort zones. "You've got to video yourself. Explain why you deserve the shot," he said, noting how nervous people became when a camera was pointed at them. Still, each event, call-out, and hometown racer believed that their moment in the spotlight was real. Fans followed along closely, tracking the builds and sharing the excitement. The idea of everyday drivers racing on national television under the Locals Only banner felt fresh and energizing. And everything that happened before filming even began helped accelerate the production. Then the cameras stopped rolling, the road trips ended. And that was when what they described as the looming fear set in. In their own words, once filming Wrapped, there was a real concern that none of it might ever air. Farmtruck admitted, "For a while there was silence. We started unpacking our bags, thinking maybe it was all over." To an outsider, that might sound casual, but to them it was devastating. Imagine pouring effort, time, and money into a project, only to be met with nothing when the work is done. That uncertainty was heartbreaking. 2 well-known figures in racing television had stepped into a new format while carrying expectations not only for themselves, but for dozens of local racers who trusted the promise. Yet there was no announcement, no confirmed air date, and no clear follow-up. This was not a mechanical failure or a fiery crash. It was a crisis rooted in visibility and broken momentum. Picture the scene after the final wrap day. Local racers return home. Builds are finished, cameras are boxed up, footage is reviewed, and then nothing. Days stretch into weeks, and weeks turn into months. A ZN described the feeling as strange, explaining that every season they would wrap, look at each other, and say, "This might be it. We probably just did our last show." It was not because fans disappeared or cars stopped running, but because the network and broadcast machinery went silent, and the impact extended far beyond the hosts. Local racers had been promised national exposure, and that opportunity could vanish if the show failed to air or was delayed indefinitely. That weight pressed heavily on Farmtruck and AZN. This waiting period was especially brutal for 2 people fueled by speed, action, and motion. Racing rewards fast starts, immediate response, and visible outcomes. Silence ran against everything they knew. It felt as though the race had ended, but no one had seen the result. Fans were uncertain, local drivers could not see their spotlight, and the hosts could not offer answers. Unpacking bags was not about travel alone. It symbolized expectations quietly collapsing. Still, amid the uncertainty, they found perspective. Farmtruck remarked that even if it all ended tomorrow, they would still have the stories. That acceptance reflected resilience. Yet the questions remained heavy. Would the show move forward? Would local racers get their moment? And would Farmtruck and AZN return with engines roaring and crowds watching once again? Fallout and lasting impact. When the silence arrived, it was not merely uncomfortable. It spread outward in waves. For Farmtruck and AZN, the uncertainty surrounding whether Street Outlaws, Locals Only, would actually air created fallout in several directions at once. It affected them personally. the racers they had invited into the project, and the broader, grassroots racing world that had tuned in to the promise. To understand why it mattered so much, it helps to look at how things unraveled and what was suddenly put at risk. They had wrapped a full season, traveled across the country, and welcomed local racers from region to region under the locals-only concept. Then came the moment Farmtruck described simply as, for a while, there was silence. That waiting period introduced tension not only for the hosts, but for everyone connected to the show. For the local racers, this was not just another race opportunity. They had been told they would receive national television exposure, something that could change their trajectory overnight. The idea of an average local racer stepping up to face major names carried real weight. But when the show's future stalled, that promise was suddenly suspended. For Farmtruck and AZN, the concept was personal. They genuinely believed in what they were building. So being met with silence instead of clarity cut deeply. Soon, questions began circulating everywhere. Would the show actually launch? Would the local drivers ever be seen? Would the entire project quietly fade away? At the same time, the duo still had sponsorship obligations, builds in progress, and appearances lined up. They remained active, yet the very platform they had planned around was stuck in limbo. That uncertainty sparked concern over reputation. They were not just waiting on a show, they were waiting to see how this pause might reshape how people viewed them. This moment threatened multiple pillars of their identity. On one side, Farmtruck and AZN were racers before anything else. On the other, they had expanded into television and invested heavily in a spin-off beyond the original Street Outlaws format. The delay created the risk that they might be seen less as active racers and more as personalities tied to a stalled project. There was also the issue of perception. The locals-only format positioned them as mentors and door openers for new talent. If the project failed to materialize, that role could be questioned. The momentum they had built across racing, television, and fan engagement suddenly felt fragile. Yet the largest impact extended beyond them. Locals Only had been framed as something bigger than a TV show. The format invited 8 drivers from each region, with one earning the chance to race a 405 list veteran for a bonus payout. As Farmtruck called it, it was an instant spotlight on your average local racer who might never get another opportunity like this. When that visibility wavered, it affected local racers, their families, and their communities. Some participants may have felt left hanging, with investments, hopes for exposure, and potential sponsorship paths suddenly uncertain. Tracks, fans, and grassroots builders were watching too. The original Street Outlaws had helped fuel renewed interest in grassroots drag racing, and this new concept carried similar potential. Faced with all this, Farmtruck and AZN were forced to confront the possibility that the venture might end abruptly. Farmtruck's words captured the moment. "If we end up done tomorrow, we'll still have the crazy stories." That statement reflected realism, not surrender. It showed that while the platform might change, who they were as racers would not. They chose to lean into what they could control: cars, tracks, fans, and community support, rather than network decisions. Touring, events, builds, merchandise, and partnerships outside the broadcast cycle became real considerations. In doing so, they reassured sponsors, fans, and local racers alike that they were still moving forward. In the racing world, the loudest sound is often the engine roar, but the hush hits hardest here. Farmtruck and AZN faced a moment when their momentum, platform, and promise to others all paused. The fallout reached from the shop to the local tracks, the TV screens, and the racing community. Their professional and personal stakes were high. The locals they invited were counting on exposure, and the racing culture anticipated a new chapter. But when that chapter hung in the balance, every other part shifted. The heartbreaking core of the story. When you trace the path Farmtruck and AZN followed, the most painful element is not the threat of a wreck, a blown motor, or a failed build. What truly stings is the space between what they set out to accomplish and what ultimately unfolded. They committed to Street Outlaws, locals only with a genuine belief that they were creating something meaningful, a national spotlight for everyday racers, continued momentum for themselves, and a clear next step forward. Yet, as they later described in their Drag Illustrated interview, that promise was left hanging in more ways than one. "We shot an entire season and traveled the country," Farmtruck explained. "Once we wrapped, there was this looming fear that none of it might air. For a while, there was silence. We started unpacking our bags, figuring maybe it was all over." That pause, that stretch of waiting, became the emotional center of their story. In the build-up, everything had felt alive. The road trips, the local racers getting their chance, the cameras rolling, the familiar faces, and the high stakes all pointed toward momentum. But when filming ended, the energy did not automatically follow. Sitting back in the shop, engines cooled and lights dimmed, wondering what came next was unfamiliar territory for racers who lived on instant results and visible outcomes. Farmtruck and AZN came from a strip racing culture defined by immediacy. They built cars, chased the 405 list, and lived in a world where every run delivered an answer. Win or lose, you knew exactly where you stood. Their instincts were tuned to revving engines, chirping tires, and decisive finishes. Suddenly, they found themselves in a chapter where the race did not simply end. It vanished from sight entirely. AZN captured the feeling plainly when he said, "It's a weird feeling. Every season, we'd wrap, look at each other, and go, well, that might be it. We've probably done our last show, and we'd just go back to our lives." That statement reveals how deeply uncertainty had settled in. It was not only fear that the show might stall, but the heavier fear of doing everything right and never having it seen. For two men whose identities were built around being racers who mattered, that realization landed hard. The heartbreak extended beyond themselves to the promises they made to others. Farmtruck described locals only as an instant spotlight on your average local racer who might never get another opportunity like this. That word, might, carried real weight. They believed this project was not just a chance, but the chance. When the season wrapped and the spotlight failed to turn on quickly, that belief was left suspended. Imagine being one of the local racers they chose. You submitted your video, were selected, built your car, showed up, and ran your race. Then you went home to wait. The filming was done, the excitement built, maybe even personal finances were adjusted in anticipation. Yet the exposure you were promised hovered uncertainly. That kind of waiting creates a quiet heartbreak that does not always show on the surface, but cuts deeply. What made it heavier was the contrast with their earlier world. Racing had always been clear-cut. You lined up, you raced, and you learned the result immediately. This new reality was different. You finished filming, packed up, and drove home, knowing the outcome existed somewhere out of reach. It was not a loss you could point to, just a delay with no timeline. For people who thrived on momentum, that ambiguity was unsettling. Their disappointment raised difficult questions. Who were they if the show never aired? What was all that work if it disappeared into editing rooms or quiet delays? Some might dismiss this as vanity, but it was not. They had invested years building trust, credibility, and relationships. Watching part of that effort sit idle indefinitely could unsettle anyone. There was also a sense of isolation. Local racers likely reached out for updates, and the hosts may not have had answers. Sponsors watching the process could hesitate. Fans accustomed to loud engines and constant motion were met instead with silence. That quiet was foreign in a sport known for noise, speed, and spectacle. Still, their response remained honest. It was not celebratory, but it was grounded. They acknowledged that they knew who they were and what they had done, even if that chapter failed to move forward. That acceptance did not erase the heartbreak, but it made it real. Ultimately, the pain lies not only in what failed to happen, but in what might have been. It is the vision of a future loaded and ready, the pedal pressed, only for the track to disappear. It is the anticipation of exposure, the buildup of momentum, the trust placed in a platform, followed by waiting without certainty. For Farmtruck and AZN, that silence cast a shadow over what looked like their next major climb. Their rise, their builds, and their presence led them here, only to face a pause defined not by engines or loss, but by quiet. Why the moment took everyone by surprise. Up until everything slowed to a halt, Farmtruck and AZN appeared to be riding an unstoppable wave. Street victories stacked up, ambitious builds kept rolling out of the shop, and television exposure continued to grow. From the outside, it looked like every move they made pushed them further forward. That is exactly why what happened next felt so unexpected. Street Outlaws, locals only seemed like the most logical next chapter in their journey. They hit the road, moved from region to region, and opened the door for local racers who had never been given that kind of national platform before. The message was clear and simple: this is your shot. And then, once the filming wrapped, something strange happened. As they later admitted, for a while there was silence. That silence was not part of the plan. Even after nearly a dozen years working in front of cameras, as AZN himself acknowledged, they were still exposed to the unpredictable nature of television production. On the street or at the track, they understood the rules. You build the car, you line up, you race, and the result is immediate. Wins and losses are decided in real time, but network decisions, programming schedules, and whether a project actually makes it to air sit completely outside a racer's control. That reality began to settle in, and it was deeply unsettling. What made the moment even more jarring was the realization that effort did not guarantee outcome. They had traveled across the country, worked with crews, coordinated events, and brought local racers into the fold with the promise of exposure. Yet none of that ensured the show would appear on screens. Farmtruck openly voiced the fear when he said that none of it might air. The locals had been told they would be on national television, and suddenly that promise felt fragile. As he put it, they started unpacking their bags, already bracing themselves for the possibility that it might be over before it ever truly began. This pause forced them to confront something entirely new. Their confidence had always been built on motion and momentum. They believed their path was steady, almost predictable in its forward direction. A gap like this, a void between effort and outcome, was not something they had anticipated. Instead of uncertainty at the finish line of a race, they faced uncertainty off the track, where no amount of driving skill could change the situation. The experience introduced unfamiliar emotions. Doubt crept in where confidence usually lived. Questions replaced clear answers. They were pushed to examine how much of their identity rested not just in racing, but in visibility and platform. It was not simply a professional pause. It was a moment that tested their trust in a system they could not control and challenged assumptions they had carried for years. So now we leave it to you. After everything Farmtruck and AZN poured into Street Outlaws and the locals' only concept, do you think they deserved a clearer outcome? Should they have spoken openly about the silence when it happened? Or was patience the smartest move while things played out behind the scenes? Your perspective matters, especially as fans who followed their journey from the streets to the spotlight. Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to like the video, share it with fellow Street Outlaws fans, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the moments that shape the racers, the culture, and the community you love.